New signs that the U.S. could be moving closer to giving Ukraine F-16 fighter jets. President Zelensky has been, of course, pushing for this and reiterates it at every turn, arguing that they need the planes, the jets, to defend against Russian missile and drone attacks. Natasha Bertrand has more details on this with this new development. Natasha, it seems that they're maybe not necessarily opening the door yet, but can we say at least that they're still not slamming it shut?
I think that's right, Kate. And so what we've learned is that 2 Ukrainian pilots have been in the U.S. to train with the Americans on flight simulator systems, essentially. They are learning how to fly certain American systems. They're not actually training on those systems themselves, on actual planes, but they are kind of getting instruction from the Americans about how to become better pilots, for example, not only on their own systems, but also to see how long it would potentially take them to learn a system like the F-16, for example, or other kinds of American aircraft. So this is described by a senior U.S. military official as kind of a familiarization process, as something that is fairly routine between the U.S. and Ukraine. But it is actually the first time that Ukrainian pilots have come to the U.S. for this kind of training. So that could be a kind of a harbinger of things to come. Now, at the same time, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, is in the Middle East today, and he is commenting on the situation in Bakhmut. Of course, very difficult, as we just heard Melissa Bell lay out there. But he is saying that even if the Ukrainians don't succeed there, that he does not necessarily view that as a strategic failure. Take a listen to what he told reporters earlier today.
I would not view that as an operational or a strategic setback. I think it's more of a symbolic value than it is strategic and operational value. What I do see on a daily basis is the Russians continuing to pour in a lot of ill-trained and ill-equipped troops, and those troops are very quickly meeting their demise.
So the question now, Kate, is how long are the Ukrainians going to hold out in Bakhmut? Of course, we have reported here that the U.S. and some of its allies have been urging the Ukrainians to pull back because, of course, as you heard Austin say there, the U.S. does believe that this is largely a symbolic, a city of symbolic value rather than strategic value. Getting them to pull out, focus elsewhere, that may be what the U.S. believes is for the best for the Ukrainians. But, of course, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, still viewing it as a key city where they can wear down the Russians there, Kate.
All right. Well, Natasha, thank you so much. Joining me now for more on this is CNN military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. It's good to see you, General. So this battle in Bakhmut, Defense Secretary Austin, and what Natasha just played for us, Defense Secretary Austin calling it having symbolic value, more symbolic value than strategic and operational value if the Russians take it. What do you see there?
I agree with Secretary Austin's view, Kate. It has been, and by the way, let's talk about Bakhmut and how long we have been discussing it.
Right.
It's been over 7 months since that city has been under siege by the Russians, and on a weekly basis, we have heard different Russians say they're about to surround it. And the Ukrainians continue to fight. And every day I wake up to a text from a friend of mine in Ukraine that says, Bakhmut holds, 2 words. So they have been very successful. It will never be a strategic or an operational victory for either side. It will be a psychological victory, and it already is for the Ukrainian forces, because they have held it so long and have drained so much Russian manpower in that cauldron of blood.
I wanted to ask you about that toll on the Russians first. I mean, you know, we have heard from more analysts over and over again, is just the bloody toll that this progress has taken for the Russians to get where they are in Bakhmut. What price have they had to pay to pull this off if the Ukrainians do retreat?
Yeah, well, let's talk numbers first, Kate. And I'm not a big body count guy. I learned early in my career that's never a good indicator of who's winning or who's losing. But Alexei Danilov, who's the head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, said last week that Russia was losing 7 soldiers for every 1 Ukrainian soldier killed in the defense of that city. That is just unbelievable from a military perspective. And I think your reporters, both Natasha and others, have talked about this. General Syrskyi, who's commander of Ukraine's ground forces, visited Bakhmut last Friday and talked about the state of the city's defense with the military commanders and said, let's continue to hold because we can. Today, there were reports of Ukrainian special operations commanders visiting the city and saying, here's what we need to do to continue to push the fight and kill even more Russians. So it is something that's trapped Russia in this area that they can't use other places. We've been talking also about the potential for offensives and counteroffensives. I believe Russia has been on the offensive for quite some time now, and they are losing considerable amounts of their forces in doing that. And soon we will see Ukraine, when more and more Western type equipment gets into their hands, they will start their counterattacks and their counteroffensives. But the entire time, Ukraine has been holding the Russian force in this area and preparing to attack in other places.
Yeah, so interesting. You know, this morning also, Russia says that its air defenses brought down 3 missiles over Belgorod in Russia. And the New York Times, General, is reporting that Ukrainian special forces made a rare public acknowledgement, actually, today that they conducted a cross-border strike in Russia, destroying an unmanned observation tower, is how they describe it, in the Bryansk region using a drone strike. That caught my attention because I wanted to ask you what you see really in any Ukrainian strikes happening within Russia, and also Ukraine saying as such.
Well, those who have not served in the military, Kate, I kind of think this is like a video game that you just find a target, shoot at it, send drones there. But what is happening really is intel collection to conduct further strikes. And when you're seeing the Ukrainian forces launch drones into Russian oblasts like Belgorod, like Burshin, like even outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg that knock down some of their air defenses, Russia is now having to take air defenses and surround those cities, taking them away from the front line. So it's a matter of materiel that's moving back and forth inside of Russia to the front line of Donbass and back again. So if Ukraine can continue to threaten inside of Russia, that requires the Russian generals to move their equipment back to defend their forces. So it is all really the continuation of this attempts at attrition warfare, knocking out as many forces as you can, and at the same time destabilizing the defense that Russia has been attempting to build on the front lines. They can't have it both ways. So, you know, when you're threatening cities that are 100 miles away from the front line, the Russians have to do something about it that they don't want to do, protect their citizens, much like Ukraine's been protecting their own.
General Hurling, it's great to see you as always. Thank you.
Let's speak now to CNN military analyst Colonel Cedric Leighton. Good morning, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Jim. Good to be with you.
This has been a bloody fight for weeks. Tremendous number of losses on the Russian side, but also the Ukrainian side. There's a read that this is less about Bakhmut itself than Ukrainian forces showing they'll fight for every inch of territory. They don't want to give any ground anywhere. And I wonder, is this the right use, in your view, of Ukrainian resources and manpower?
I certainly understand the desire to keep every inch of Ukrainian territory. And it's very much an emotional argument, and kind of like the Alamo in Texas, back in the 19th century. But there's a reality here, and Ukraine needs to save as many of its soldiers as possible. This is not the right strategy for the situation that they find themselves in. There are times when you have to do a tactical withdrawal, so there are times when you have to do a strategic withdrawal. And this is one of those times where it becomes imperative to save as many Ukrainian soldiers as possible to basically fight another day. And what that means is they have to really pull back to more defensive positions, ones that they can hold, so that they can save as many of their own people as possible.
What does this mean for the next step? Russia has been attempting some sort of offensive, at least throwing more manpower in the east without making much progress. Ukrainians planning a counter-offensive. Does ceding Bakhmut at all imperil Ukraine's plans to counterattack and try to gain back more pieces of Russian-held territory in the east?
I think that's one of the biggest worries that the Ukrainian command has, and it's a legitimate concern. But if you perform a strategic withdrawal in the right way, you can actually save not only your troops, but also your capability. And this is what's important. They need to save as much capability as possible in order to mount a counteroffensive. They can withdraw from Bakhmut and then, for example, mount the counteroffensive, let's say in the south, around Volodar or some other area that they believe is softer. And that's the kind of thing that I think they should be considering at this point.